What if the most dangerous corporate spy or the most critical witness in a multi-million-dollar investigation isn't a person at all?
Right. I mean, we always picture some guy in a trench coat or a disgruntled executive leaping data.
Exactly. Picture a major corporate merger, right? Months of secret negotiations, heavily guarded boardrooms, and yet the details leak.
And the culprit isn't a wiretap.
No, it's that 5-inch piece of glass and metal sitting in your pocket right now.
It's terrifying when you actually map it out.
It really is. I mean, from devices that mimic cell towers to intercept your text out of thin air, to forensic scientists using actual electron microscopes to manually read individual data cells baked into a silicon chip.
Your smartphone is basically a ticking time bomb of digital evidence.
It totally is. And, before we really get into the weeds today, if you want to master these systems, if you want the insider technical knowledge that will position you for a brilliantly successful future in MIS, CIS, or IT, make sure to hit like, subscribe, share, and comment right now.
Yeah, that engagement really helps us bring this content to you.
It does. And be sure to check the description below for access to additional resources you'll definitely find valuable.
Yeah.
You cannot secure a network if you don't understand how the hardware is quietly betraying it.
Well, and the sheer scale of data generation is, it's just difficult to conceptualize until you see it mapped out in a forensic lab.
Right.
We tend to view our mobile devices as secure, localized vaults. But the reality is they're highly active broadcasting stations. They are continuously recording and transmitting an unfathomable amount of behavioral, locational, and, well, transactional data.
And it's all autonomous, right?
Yeah.
In the background.
Operating totally in the background of our daily lives. Understanding that betrayal is foundational for modern business leadership.
So true. And a massive welcome to you, the students of Tarleton State University's Dr. Sam Pack College of Business, and all the incredibly curious lifelong learners joining our deep dive today.
We are thrilled to have you here.
Last week, we navigated the complexities of Chapter 11, focusing on cloud forensics and the Internet of Anything, data floating in the ether.
Smart cities, connected appliances, all of that.
Yeah. But today, we are bringing that massive scope directly into the palm of your hand. We're summarizing and interpreting insights from Chapter 12, Mobile Device Forensics.
This is from the definitive 2025 edition of Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigations by Nelson, Stewart, Phillips, and Wilson.
And just for context, this is the 12th of our 15-chapter journey. It's all designed to equip you with the practical takeaways you need to navigate this wild frontier of mobile data.
And we really have to frame this frontier within the context of a recent legal precedence, too.
Oh, absolutely. The laws have had to scramble to catch up.
They really have. I mean, for a long time, the investigative approach to a mobile phone was no different than searching a suspect's pockets at the time of an arrest.
Just grab the phone and scroll through the text.
Literally, yeah. Officers would just scroll. But as the storage capacity grew to encompass a person's entire digital life, the legal system had to adapt.
Because it's not just a pocketbook anymore. It's your bank, your diary, everything.
Exactly. The Supreme Courts of Oregon and Ohio, and ultimately the broader federal legal framework, established that a search warrant is an absolute requirement to examine a mobile device now.
Right.
The concentration of private info is just too high. Plus, any data extracted that doesn't specifically pertain to the parameters of the warrant, well, it has to be strictly redacted from the public record.
That makes sense. But before an investigator even thinks about obtaining a warrant to physically plug a phone into a lab computer, we need to understand how that phone is communicating with the outside world.
The invisible webs, yeah.
Yeah, the invisible webs. We all see the little 5G icon in the corner of our screens.
Yeah.
But the physical reality of how those signals travel dictates how vulnerable the data is.
It really is a physics problem.
Right. How did we get to the point where a phone can stream a 4K video while you're hurtling down a highway at 70 miles an hour?
So the evolution of cellular networks is essentially a history of engineers trying to solve bandwidth and interference. It started with 1G, which was purely analog.
Like old radio.
Yeah. These networks functioned by modulating radio waves to carry a continuous voice signal. But analog is incredibly inefficient. It takes up a lot of frequency space and degrades easily.
So then 2G comes along.
Right, the monumental shift. 2G digitized the signal. Instead of a continuous wave, your voice was broken down into data packets. And this digitization is actually what introduced SMS text messaging.
I always wondered about that, like why texts were limited to 160 characters in the early days. It was just a byproduct of fitting data into the small leftover control channels, right?
Precisely. They basically piggybacked the text data on the signaling paths the network already used to connect voice calls. Then, hardware improved. 3G allowed users to maintain connections at higher physical speeds, introduced functional mobile web browsing, but the architectural leap that really defines modern mobile forensics arrived with 4G and long-term evolution, or LTE.
Which brought crazy speeds.
Yeah, 4G required a fundamental redesign of how data was transmitted to achieve speeds between like 45 and 144 megabits per second.
Our sources mention a specific technology here that drives those speeds. OFDM, or orthogonal frequency division multiplexing.
It's quite a mouthful.
It really is.
Yeah.
Explain that to me. Like, I have zero radio engineering background. How does OFDM actually move data faster?
Okay, think of an older 3G connection, like a single massive dirt road. You can send a really wide, heavy truck full of data down that road.
Okay, got the truck.
The problem is if there's a pothole or bad weather, which in radio terms is electromagnetic interference, that single massive truck gets delayed or corrupted and your data drops.
The call drops.
Exactly. So OFDM takes that single dirt road and replaces it with a highly structured, multi-lane superhighway. Instead of one broad carrier signal, it splits the data stream into dozens or even hundreds of tiny parallel carrier signals.
Oh, so it sends like a fleet of tiny, fast sports cars instead of one massive truck.
Yes, perfect analogy. And the orthogonal part of the acronym is the real genius element.
What does that actually mean?
In physics, orthogonal means these separate frequencies are precisely mathematically spaced. So their wave peaks and troughs never interfere with each other, even though they are packed tightly together.
So they don't crash into each other on the highway.
Right. If a burst of interference knocks out one tiny sports car, the system only loses a fraction of the data packet. It can easily retransmit just that tiny piece rather than losing the entire payload.
That's incredibly resilient.
It is. It uses battery energy much more efficiently, too.
And that basically sets the stage for the 5G era we're currently in, which exponentially increases that transfer rate to power the Internet of Things stuff we discussed last week.
And, the sources note 6G is already in development for the 2030s.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
But beneath those generational labels, there's the fundamental language the phones are speaking. Like here in the US, we've historically heard about CDMA versus GSM.
Right, the classic carrier battle.
Yeah. How do those two protocols actually differ in how they slice up the airwaves?
It basically comes down to how multiple users share the same cell tower without talking over each other.
Okay.
Code Division Multiple Access, or CDMA. That's a technology originally developed during World War II for secure military communications.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, later patented by Qualcomm. CDMA takes your digitized voice, assigns it a unique mathematical code, and then spreads that signal across the entire available radio frequency spectrum.
So it's everywhere all at once.
Exactly. The receiver at the cell tower knows your specific code, so it can pick your voice out of the background noise of everyone else's calls. Verizon is the major U.S. carrier that built its infrastructure on CDMA, conforming to the IS-95 standard.
And the alternative, which is what the vast majority of the planet uses, is GSM.
Global System for Mobile Communications, yes. GSM takes a totally different approach called time division.
How does that work?
Instead of giving everyone a unique code and letting them transmit all at once, GSM takes a specific radio frequency and slices it into tiny millisecond time slots.
So they take turns.
Your phone is rapidly taking turns transmitting in its assigned slot. It happens so fast you never notice the gaps.
That's crazy.
In the U.S., AT&T and T-Mobile built their networks on GSM. And while modern 4G and 5G LTE networks have largely homogenized how data is handled globally, understanding whether a legacy device is CDMA or GSM fundamentally changes how a forensic investigator approaches the hardware.
That makes total sense. So let's talk about the physical infrastructure catching those signals. When I drive down the highway and I see those massive metal towers disguised as, like, fake pine trees.
Right, Frankentrees.
Yeah. What is actually happening up there? The geographic areas are divided into cells, but how does the tower process the signal?
The architecture is broken into 3 distinct layers of control. At the very edge, the part your phone actually talks to, is the base transceiver station, or BTS.
The BTS.
This is the physical radio equipment and the large antennas you see on the tower. Its only job is to transmit and receive the raw radio waves.
Got it.
Because a single BTS can only handle a specific limit of simultaneous connections, multiple BTS towers in a region are wired back to a base station controller, or BSC.
Okay, so the BSC is like a manager.
It acts as a local traffic cop, managing the radio channels and orchestrating the handoff as you drive your car out of range of one BTS and into the range of the next.
And where does the BSC send the data?
It routes all that regional traffic back to a mobile switching center, or MSC.
MSC, okay.
MSC is the heavy-duty telephone exchange. It connects your cellular call to the global public landline network or routes your data packets to the broader internet.
Okay, so our sources note that the physical layout of the antennas on that BTS tower is highly standardized. It's not just a single pole radiating in all directions.
No, it's very specific.
There are usually 3 distinct antenna arrays, right?
Yes. To provide 360-degree coverage efficiently, towers are typically divided into 320-degree sectors. The first sector, equipped with the alpha antenna, traditionally points north.
Alpha is north.
Then the beta antenna covers the southeast, and the gamma antenna covers the southwest.
And see, this level of physical precision is where the forensic implications start to get genuinely alarming.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if my phone is constantly checking in with the network to ensure it has a signal, and the network knows exactly which antenna alpha, beta, or gamma my phone is talking to,
It knows where you are.
the network fundamentally always knows my physical location.
That is the inadvertent consequence of cellular design.
Right,
I mean, to deliver a phone call to you, the system must know where you are at all times.
It has to, mechanically.
And it gets far more precise than just knowing which 120-degree sector you're in. By comparing the signal strength from multiple towers, the network can triangulate your exact position. Combine that with your phone constantly sniffing out local Wi-Fi networks and Bluetooth beacons, plus the internal GPS satellites. The location data is remarkably exact.
This tracking capability is deeply integrated into emergency services too, right? Via the E911 system.
Yes, mandatory enhanced 911, or E911. It ensures that when a user dials 911, the phone's operating system actively switches on the GPS service, even if the user had it toggled off.
Wait, it can override your settings?
Completely. And it transmits an SMS data packet with the exact latitude and longitude straight to the dispatcher.
But emergency dispatchers aren't the only ones who can trigger that location beacon. Cellular providers can execute a ping on any device on their network.
If they have legal authorization, yes.
So explain the mechanics of a ping. Like if I'm a suspect in a corporate espionage case and law enforcement gets a warrant to ping my phone, what actually happens?
Right. The cellular provider sends a silent, hidden control signal to your mobile device.
Silent, so I wouldn't know.
Completely silent. It operates beneath the user interface. Your screen won't light up, you won't get a notification, nothing.
That's eerie.
It forces the phone's hardware to wake up its GPS receiver, calculate its precise coordinates, and silently transmit that data back to the carrier.
And then what?
The carrier then generates a cell phone pinging report for the investigator, providing real-time tracking of the physical device.
Okay, but that relies on the cellular provider cooperating with a legal warrant. What happens when an entity, whether that's a highly sophisticated corporate spy, a hostile nation state, or even a local police force utilizing, aggressive surveillance tech, decides to bypass the cellular provider entirely?
Yeah. That brings us to the deeply unsettling world of MSI catchers and cell site simulators.
Yes. To understand this, we need to know how a phone identifies itself.
Right. Every cellular device possesses a unique International Mobile Subscriber Identity, or MSI number. It is the permanent, unalterable serial number assigned by the cell provider to recognize your specific account. Surveillance devices are engineered to aggressively hunt for these IMSI numbers.
The sources outline 2 distinct modes for these devices, passive and active. Let's break down the mechanics of the passive mode first.
So a passive IMSI catcher is essentially an incredibly sensitive radio receiver. It does not broadcast anything at all.
It just listens.
Right. It sits completely silent in a vehicle or a backpack, passively scanning the airwaves and recording the raw data flying back and forth between legitimate cell towers and the cell phones in the immediate vicinity.
And because it's just listening, it's basically undetectable.
Virtually undetectable, yes.
So what can it actually extract just by listening?
Well, it immediately collects the IMSI numbers of every single device in the area. That allows the operator to know exactly who is in a building.
Just from the metadata.
Yeah, it captures metadata, who is texting whom, the duration of calls. But more critically, if the network is using older, weaker encryption protocols, a passive catcher can pull the actual unencrypted contents of SMS messages, email attachments, and web browsing traffic right out of the air.
Out of thin air.
Ah.
As terrifying as that is, the active mode seems exponentially worse. The active cell site simulator, commonly known by the brand name Stingray.
The Stingray, yes. It doesn't just listen, it impersonates a tower.
How does a box in a random van trick my phone into abandoning a multi-million-dollar legitimate Verizon or AT&T tower?
It exploits a fundamental rule programmed into every mobile phone's firmware: preserve battery life.
Oh, because searching for a signal drains the battery.
Exactly. To save battery, your phone is hard-coded to always connect to the cell tower, broadcasting the strongest, clearest signal.
Okay.
A Stingray exploits this by broadcasting a localized signal that is artificially stronger than the legitimate tower down the street.
So the phone gets duped.
Your phone sees this incredibly strong signal, assumes it's a closer, better tower, willingly drops its connection to the real network, and authenticates itself directly to the Stingray.
Wow. And once my phone is connected to this fake tower, the operator basically owns my data stream.
They insert themselves as a man in the middle. The Stingray can now determine your exact location using the pinging features we discussed.
Because it is acting as the carrier.
Right. And because all your traffic routes through their device before being passed on to the real internet, they can actively divert calls. They can intercept a text message you are trying to send, alter the text, and then forward the altered message to the recipient.
They can alter the text in transit.
Yes. They can spoof websites, redirecting your browser from your actual banking portal to a malicious clone to harvest your credentials.
The idea that the physical airways around us can be manipulated to spoof a text message is just staggering. It makes me think of these devices as digital ankle monitors that we voluntarily pay a monthly fee to wear.
That is a very accurate, if grim, way to look at it.
Which brings up a massive legal reality check for the business students listening. If the police want to deploy a Stingray to track a suspect's location, how does the law view the physical airwaves? Is location data public space, or is it private?
The legal framework here is heavily anchored in the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures.
Right.
Historically, the Fourth Amendment protected physical spaces, your home, your car, your physical papers, but it also explicitly protects your effects.
Effects meaning personal property.
Over the last decade, high-profile Supreme Court rulings have modernized this interpretation. A person's continuous, historical, and real-time location data generated by their mobile device is now legally considered an effect.
So tracking a phone is legally identical to tracking a physical person.
Precisely. Utilizing an active cell site simulator to force a phone to reveal its location or demanding historical location logs from a carrier is legally classified as a search. It is akin to law enforcement attaching a physical GPS tracker to your vehicle or conducting relentless physical surveillance. Therefore, barring severe emergency exceptions, law enforcement must obtain a judge's warrant based on probable cause to utilize these tools or gather this data.
Okay, I understand the law protects citizens from government overreach, but let's look at this from the perspective of an IT professional defending a corporate network.
Okay.
If the very architecture of a cellular network allows a corporate spy to park a van near my CEO's house, spin up a fake tower, and actively intercept or spoof their communications, how can a business ever truly secure data in motion?
That is the harsh reality every IT architect must accept. The network itself is inherently hostile.
Inherently hostile.
You cannot secure the airwaves, and you do not control the cellular towers. Therefore, your security posture must assume that every single transmission will be intercepted.
So what's the defense?
The only defense is to secure the data before it leaves the physical device. This requires enforcing strict mobile device management policies, mandatory virtual private networks, or VPNs that encrypt the tunnel between the phone and the corporate server.
Right, and end-to-end encrypted messaging.
Yes. You must render the intercepted data mathematically useless to the adversary catching it. Let them catch it, but make sure they can't read it.
Speaking of data the carrier holds, when law enforcement does have a warrant, there are specific logs they request. We talked about the live pinging report. The sources detail two critical historical reports. What is a CDR?
A call detailed record, or CDR, is a comprehensive ledger maintained by the cellular provider for billing and diagnostic purposes.
Basically the phone bill.
A very detailed phone bill. It lists every single call and SMS message sent or received by a specific phone number. It includes the exact timestamps, the duration of the calls, and the terminating numbers.
So it shows exactly who was talking to who.
It provides a complete relational map of who the suspect is communicating with, yes.
And the second report is CSLI, Cell Site Location Information. I've often heard this referred to on crime documentaries as a cell tower dump. How does that actually work in practice?
A CSLI report provides the geographic data. If an investigator has a specific suspect, they can request the CSLI for that individual's phone, which generates a chronological map of every single tower that phone connected to.
So tracking their movements across a city over weeks or months.
Exactly. Conversely, if a crime occurs in a specific warehouse at, say, 2:00 a.m., investigators can request a tower dump of the BTS covering that warehouse.
And what does the provider give them?
The provider will hand over a list of every single IMSI number that connected to that specific tower during that 1-hour window.
Wow, so everyone in the area.
Investigators then cross-reference those IMSI numbers to identify potential suspects or witnesses who were physically present at the scene.
Okay, if the airwaves are that compromised and constantly tracking us, it places all the burden of security on the physical device itself. We have to look at the physical armor of the phone.
But the hardware.
All right, Section 2, Anatomy of a Digital Witness. When a forensic examiner finally gets their hands on a device, what are they actually looking at under the glass?
Well, it's critical to remember that modern mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, wearable smartwatches, drones, they are not traditional telephones.
They're mini computers.
They are highly sophisticated, cloud-enabled computing access terminals. They possess the processing power and complex architecture of desktop computers from just a few years ago, miniaturized and paired with near-field communication and cellular radio modules.
When an IT hardware tech or an investigator cracks the casing open, what is the physical anatomy of the storage? Where does the operating system live versus, like, my actual photos?
The architecture relies on specialized memory modules. You have the microprocessor driving the logic. You have ROM, read-only memory, which traditionally holds the fundamental boot firmware.
And the RAM?
Then you have the volatile memory, RAM, or random access memory. RAM is crucial forensically because it holds the exact decrypted state of whatever the phone is actively processing at that exact millisecond.
But if the phone turns off?
If the phone loses power, the RAM evaporates. It's gone.
And the permanent storage, where does that live?
System configurations and essential network data often reside in EEPROM, electronically erasable, programmable, read-only memory.
EEPROM.
Unlike older ROM chips that had to be physically removed and hit with ultraviolet light to be rewritten, EEPROM is non-volatile memory that the operating system can electrically erase and reprogram on the fly.
Got it. Then there's the SIM card. We discussed GSM networks earlier, and our sources point out that the GSM standard actually divides a user setup into two distinct pieces.
Yes. The mobile equipment, which is the physical glass and metal phone, and the SIM card.
The subscriber identity module.
It is essentially a secure smart card microprocessor in its own right. It holds the IMSI number we discussed earlier, authenticating the subscriber to the carrier network.
But it stores data too, right?
Historically, and still occasionally today, it can act as a rudimentary backup drive, storing user contacts, service-related information, and SMS messages directly on the plastic chip.
I always viewed the SIM as just a little plastic key to get on the T-Mobile network. But reading the textbook, it actually possesses its own internal, highly rigid file system. Walk me through the hierarchy of a SIM card.
Okay, it operates much like a strictly organized physical filing cabinet. At the very top of the hierarchy is the root directory, designated as the master file, or MF.
The master file is the main drawer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Inside the master file, the storage is partitioned into directory files, or DF. These are the manila folders grouping similar types of data.
Okay.
Finally, inside those directory files are the actual documents containing the binary data, which are called elementary files, or EF.
MFDF, EF.
An investigator must navigate this specific MFDF EF path to extract contacts or old text messages from the card.
And the physical form factor of these cards has drastically changed over the years. We went from the standard credit card size SIMs of the 90s down to micro SIMs and nano SIMs. But the future is the eSIM.
Embedded SIMs, yes.
How does an eSIM change the game for an investigator?
Well, an eSIM completely removes the removable plastic element. It is a tiny memory chip physically soldered directly onto the phone's motherboard during manufacturing.
So you can't just pop it out.
No. It allows users to download multiple carrier profiles digitally. You can have a personal phone number and a corporate phone number operating simultaneously on the same physical device without swapping cards.
But forensically.
Forensically, it means you can no longer simply pull the SIM to isolate the phone from the network. The identity is baked into the hardware.
That brings up a critical distinction the sources emphasize regarding data storage. Internal soldered-on memory versus external user-removable memory.
A fundamental first step for any digital forensics examiner is to physically inspect the device to determine its storage architecture. Modern flagship smartphones utilize entirely soldered-on internal storage. The memory chips are melted onto the logic board.
Right, like iPhones.
But many devices, especially budget Android phones, legacy personal digital assistants, digital cameras, and drones, they utilize user-removable storage like secure digital or SD cards.
If device supports removable storage, that creates a massive vulnerability for the investigator, right?
Yeah.
The outline gives a really great scenario regarding a missing card.
Oh, it's a classic anti-forensic tactic. Imagine an investigator at a crime scene seizing an Android device. They inspect the physical casing and see a small, flush tray on the side that requires a straight pin to eject.
Okay.
When they pop that tray out, they find two empty, square-shaped cutouts.
Oh, no.
Instantly, the investigator knows the suspect physically removed the SIM card and the microSD card before the police entered the room.
So the data is walking out the door.
If the investigator failed to perform that physical inspection, they might image the internal memory, find nothing, and erroneously conclude the device was clean, completely missing the fact that the actual evidence is sitting in the suspect's pocket.
That's wild. Let's transition from the physical silicon to the software structure organizing the data, because this is where the mechanics of digital forensics get incredibly tense.
Yeah.
Our sources detail that mobile applications utilize a specific database structure called SQLite.
SQLite is really the unsung workhorse of the mobile ecosystem. Almost every app you use, your text messages, your WhatsApp chats, your contact book, your web browser history stores its data inside an SQLite database file.
Because it's lightweight.
It is lightweight, incredibly fast, and self-contained.
Here's the aspect of SQLite that absolutely blew my mind. When I am texting someone and I decide to delete a highly sensitive message, that message isn't actually erased from the database, is it? Explain the mechanics of a deletion.
Okay, from a computer science perspective, physically overwriting ones and zeros takes processing power and time. To keep the phone running fast, SQLite uses a lazy deletion method.
Lazy deletion.
When you press delete on a text message, the database software simply alters a tiny pointer in the file system. It changes the status of the physical space where that text message lives from allocated to unallocated or available for reuse.
So it just removes the flag marking and it's important.
The actual text of your message is still sitting there on the memory chip, completely intact. It disappears from your screen. But a forensic extraction tool can look at that unallocated space and read the deleted message perfectly.
So the evidence is just sitting there, invisible.
Yeah.
But there is a catch.
Always a catch.
It doesn't sit there forever. Forensic investigators are fighting a literal ticking clock driven by the hardware itself.
That ticking clock is the interception of the SQLite software and the physical solid-state drive, or SSD, architecture of the phone.
Okay, break that down.
SQLite possesses an internal cleanup command called auto-vacuum. Eventually, the software will run this command to reorganize the database and truly wipe out those deleted and allocated records to save space.
Okay, so eventually the software cleans up.
But an even more aggressive threat to the evidence comes from the SSD controller itself.
Right, the hardware-level maintenance.
Wow.
Because solid-state drives operate completely differently than old spinning magnetic hard drives. Our sources mention SSDs perform trim commands and wear leveling. Explain how wear leveling actively destroys digital evidence.
Flash memory cells in an SSD have a finite lifespan. They can only be written to and erased a certain number of times before they physically burn out and die.
Like wearing out a piece of paper by erasing too much.
Exactly. So to prevent one sector of the drive from dying before the rest, the SSD's internal hardware controller constantly moves data around in the background to ensure all cells are used equally. This is wear leveling.
And how does that destroy the deleted text?
When the operating system issues a trim command telling the SSD that a file has been deleted, the SSD controller flags those memory cells. The next time the drive performs its background wear leveling maintenance, it will automatically permanently wipe those cells completely clean with a zero voltage charge to prepare them for fresh data.
I picture the SQLite database like a secure office shredder bin. When I delete a file, I'm basically just tossing the intact piece of paper into the bin. It's out of sight, but if an investigator breaks in, they could just reach into the bin and read it.
Right.
But the SSD's wear leveling process,
Yeah.
that is the night janitor coming in, taking the bin, and throwing it into a blazing incinerator.
That is a highly accurate analogy.
Once that janitor runs his cycle, the paper is reduced to ash. It is gone forever.
And the terrifying part for an investigator is that you have no control over the janitor's schedule. The SSD controller runs wear leveling autonomously based on its own internal algorithms.
If the hardware is actively trying to destroy deleted evidence to keep itself healthy, does that mean digital incident response is fundamentally a race against time?
It dictates the entire timeline of an investigation. Consider a corporate application for our business students.
Okay, let's hear it.
An executive decides to steal trade secrets. They download the confidential client list to their smartphone, email it to a competitor, and then delete the email and the file.
Standard corporate espionage.
Right. If the corporate security team waits a week to seize that device, the background OS processes the auto vacuum and the SSD wear leveling will have permanently incinerated the deleted evidence. The case is entirely lost.
Wow. So you have to move fast.
In mobile forensics, you must isolate and image the device the exact moment an incident is suspected.
That harsh reality perfectly sets up our next major concept. Moving into Section 3. If the data degrades so quickly and the physical device is so vulnerable to physical theft or network interception, how do massive corporations protect their data?
It's the corporate shield versus the forensic sword.
The battleground of mobile device management.
Because the perimeter of the corporate network has dissolved. I mean, employees work from coffee shops, airports, their living rooms. The modern security perimeter is the mobile device itself.
The phone is the front line.
To maintain control over proprietary data, organizations deploy mobile device management, or MDM, platforms. We are talking about enterprise-grade software solutions like Microsoft Intune, VMware Workspace ONE, or Samsung Knox Manage.
If I bring my personal phone into a BYOD bring-your-own-device environment, and the IT department asks me to install an MDM profile, what kind of control am I actually handing over to the network administrator?
You are handing over system-level authority. The primary mandate of an MDM is to protect the organization's confidential and trade secret information at all costs.
So they can see everything.
Well, not necessarily see your personal texts, but from an administrative console, IT can enforce behavioral policies. For example, preventing you from installing unapproved applications or disabling the device's camera while connected to the corporate Wi-Fi.
Oh, wow.
They can push mandatory security patches. And crucially, in a BYOD scenario, an MDM can create a deeply encrypted, isolated storage container on your personal phone.
So they partition the drive. My personal photos and texts live on one side, and the corporate emails and client data live inside a locked vault on the other.
Exactly. And the IT administrator controls the keys to that vault, but the ultimate and most forensically destructive weapon in the MDM arsenal is the automated wipe trigger.
The self-destruct sequence.
Administrators can configure the MDM to execute an instantaneous, irreversible cryptographic wipe of the device, or at least the corporate container, if certain security thresholds are breached.
Like what?
If the MDM detects the phone has been jailbroken to alter system files, or if someone inputs the wrong passcode 10 times in a row, the software triggers a self-destruct. It deletes the encryption keys, rendering the data mathematically unrecoverable instantly.
Apple has engineered a consumer-level equivalent of this as well, right? Apple Lost Mode.
Yes. If a user loses their iPhone, they can log into their iCloud account from a browser, or an IT admin can trigger it via the MDM console and initiate Lost Mode.
How does that actually work mechanically if the phone is just sitting locked on a park bench somewhere?
The iCloud server sends a priority command packet over the cellular network. Once the device receives that remote signal, it initiates a hard lockdown.
Does it turn off the radios?
It disables Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to prevent unauthorized connections, but it keeps the cellular radio active specifically to broadcast its exact GPS coordinates back to the owner.
And the self-destruct.
Furthermore, the owner can send a secondary command, the self-erase signal.
So when an investigator is standing at a crime scene looking at an iPhone, they have to assume that at any second, a signal could drop from the sky and wipe the phone clean.
It is a paramount operational hazard. The data can be destroyed remotely from across the globe in seconds.
We touched on encryption as a defense against network interception earlier. Let's delve deeply into the mechanics of encryption standards, because our sources highlight the vital distinction between protecting data in motion and data at rest.
Yes. Data in motion refers to the packets actively traversing the network, the email flying from your phone to the server. Data at rest is the physical binary code sitting statically on the phone's SSD or a remote cloud server.
And the gold standard here is end-to-end encryption.
The gold standard, absolutely.
Explain how end-to-end encryption conceptually operates without getting bogged down in the complex mathematics.
Okay, imagine you have a message and you put it in a highly secure lockbox. You lock it with a key that only you possess. You send that lockbox through the mail system, which represents the network.
Okay, sending the box.
The postal workers, the hackers, the government, they can all see the box, but none of them have the key. The box arrives at the recipient, and they use their matching private key to unlock it. The data remains encrypted during transmission and while resting on the servers in between.
Apple has heavily marketed their commitment to this with their Advanced Data Protection Framework. How robust is that system?
Apple's Advanced Data Protection is an opt-in architecture that extends end-to-end encryption to almost all of a user's iCloud data, including device backups, photos, and notes.
And the key difference.
The critical shift here is that the encryption keys are generated and stored only on the user's trusted physical devices. The data sitting in Apple's massive server farms is encrypted at rest, and Apple literally does not possess the keys to decrypt it.
Wait, if Apple doesn't have the key, what happens if a user forgets their password? If an enterprise user locks themselves out of their iCloud, how do they get their corporate data back?
Apple forces the user to establish alternative recovery methods during setup because Apple cannot help them. You can use another trusted Apple device that holds the key. You can designate a trusted recovery contact, a friend whose device can cryptographically vouch for your identity.
And if you don't have those?
Or you are generated a 28-character alphanumeric recovery key that you must print out and physically secure. If you lose your password and those 3 backup methods, the data is permanently cryptographically shredded.
Wow. That is the nuclear option for data security. Now, for daily messaging, iPhones use the proprietary iMessage utility, which natively utilizes end-to-end encryption. But Google has also caught up on the Android side, implementing the Rich Communication Service, or RCS, standard.
Right, RCS is their answer.
However, the textbook outlines a specific scenario where an investigator, Ivan, is extracting an Android phone and realizes he can read some messages perfectly, but others are locked behind encryption. What is the catch with Google RCS?
The vulnerability of RCS encryption is interoperability. For the end-to-end encryption tunnel to establish, both devices communicating must be utilizing RCS-compatible applications and be connected to the internet.
So what if they aren't?
If an Android user with RCS active texts an iPhone user on a legacy SMS network, or texts another Android user who is using an older, unupdated messaging app, the protocol cannot establish the secure lockbox.
Oh, it just fails.
It silently downgrades the transmission back to standard, unencrypted, plain text SMS, which is highly vulnerable to both network interception and forensic extraction.
So if I am a forensic examiner, and I'm tasked with extracting data from a corporate phone, how do I even know if an MDM platform is actively fighting me? The sources state that MDMs often intentionally hide their presence from the application directory.
You have to look for systemic anomalies, which forensic professionals call tells. You are looking for behaviors dictated by a strict security policy that a normal user would never configure, or settings the user is explicitly locked out of.
Give me a concrete example. If I have an Android device in the lab, what am I looking for?
You navigate to the display settings. A standard user can set their screen timeout to 5 minutes, or even tell the screen to stay awake indefinitely.
Right.
If you open those settings, and the stay awake option is completely grayed out and unselectable, and the phone forces a screen lock every 30 seconds, that is a massive red flag.
Because the MDM is forcing it.
The MDM is overriding the local OS to ensure the phone is never left unlocked and unattended.
What about an iOS device?
Similarly, you would check the auto lock configuration. If the option to select never is missing entirely, you can confidently deduce that an MDM provisioning profile is actively enforcing a corporate security standard on that hardware.
You know, this creates a fascinating paradox. If an MDM is specifically engineered to resist forensic extraction tools, and tech giants like Apple and Google mathematically refuse to build decryption backdoors for law enforcement, aren't corporate IT administrators effectively creating uninvestigable devices?
This is a huge debate.
Right. If an employee is under a valid federal investigation for embezzlement, Where is the line between a business rightfully protecting its trade secrets and actively obstructing justice?
It is perhaps the defining ethical and legal conflict in modern cybersecurity. Law enforcement agencies vehemently argue for exceptional access, the creation of a secure backdoor that can only be unlocked with a valid judicial warrant.
But the tech companies push back.
They do, and cryptographers counter that the mathematics of encryption are absolute. You cannot engineer a backdoor that only the good guys can use.
If the door exists, anyone can find it.
Exactly. If a vulnerability is coded into the architecture, hostile nation-states, ransomware gangs, and corporate spies will inevitably discover and exploit it. The consensus in the tech industry is that weakening encryption for law enforcement inherently destroys security for everyone.
It is an absolute arms race. For the business students listening, you are the ones who will be drafting these BYOD policies. You have to walk an incredibly fine line.
You really do.
You must deploy MDMs robust enough to prevent intellectual property theft, while ensuring your corporate policies don't cross the line into the intentional destruction of evidence during litigation.
But examiners aren't entirely helpless against encryption. The sources reveal a fascinating workaround regarding backups.
Oh, right. When a direct physical extraction of the phone is blocked by encryption or MDM, investigators pivot to the peripheral environment. They look for where the phone has backed up its data.
Yes, and Apple iOS encrypted backups present a highly lucrative, counterintuitive forensic target.
The user can connect their iPhone to a local PC and create a backup using iTunes or Finder. They have the option to check a box that says Encrypt Local Backup, requiring a separate password.
Correct.
Logically, you would assume an encrypted backup is harder to deal with and yields less data.
Yeah.
But it's the exact opposite, isn't it?
Precisely due to the encryption, Apple trusts the security of that backup file. If a user creates an unencrypted backup, the Apple OS actively strips out the most highly sensitive personal data before saving the file to the PC.
Because a plain text backup sitting on a hard drive is a massive vulnerability.
Exactly. But if the user opts to encrypt the backup, the OS allows everything to be transferred.
What extra data are we talking about? Like, what's in the Jackpot?
An encrypted backup contains the user's entire keychain-saved passwords for applications, email accounts, and websites. It contains complete Wi-Fi connection histories and passwords. It contains deeply sensitive, granular biological data from the health app and extensive long-term call histories.
All the really good stuff.
While breaking the encryption password on the backup file requires immense computational brute forcing, if an investigator cracks it or legally compels the suspect to provide the password, they hit the absolute jackpot. They obtain vastly more sensitive data than if the user had left the backup unencrypted.
That's incredible. Now, when you consider how fragile that RAM state is and the constant threat of an MDM remote wipe, it completely changes what happens the moment an investigator walks into a room and sees a phone sitting on a desk.
It changes everything.
Which brings us to Section 4, securing the scene and taming the digital biohazard. How does an investigator handle a device that is actively trying to destroy itself?
It requires extreme procedural discipline. The primary threats are loss of volatile power, automated synchronization with cloud services, and remote wiping signals.
The golden rules.
The very first decision an investigator makes dictates the success of the entire extraction.
What are the golden rules of seizure regarding power state?
Rule number 1, determine the power state immediately. If the device is physically powered off, you leave it powered off. You do not, under any circumstances, turn it on just to see what's on the screen.
Why is turning it on so destructive?
Booting an operating system is a highly complex, write-intensive process. The moment you power on an Android or iOS device, the system writes hundreds of new diagnostic log files to the SSD.
Oh, overwriting the unallocated space.
Exactly. It alters system timestamps. It connects to the network and begins downloading pending messages, overwriting unallocated space. And critically, booting up might trigger an MDM security script that realizes the phone has been offline too long and initiates a wipe.
Wow.
Powering the device on fundamentally alters the physical evidence. You find a compatible charger, plug it into a portable battery bank to ensure it doesn't drain, but you leave the logic board asleep.
Okay, and if the device is already powered on when you find it?
If it is on, you keep it on. You immediately check the display for the current battery percentage. Volatile memory, the RAM, contains decrypted keys and active application states.
Right, the stuff that evaporates.
If the battery dies, the RAM is flushed, and the phone drops into a hardened rest state requiring the passcode to decrypt the file system upon reboot. If the screen is locked and you cannot see the battery level, you must meticulously document that ambiguity in your chain of custody logs.
The outline provides another highly specific field scenario here. An investigator, let's call him Joel, enters a suspect's office and finds a mobile device physically connected via a USB cable to a laptop computer.
That's a dangerous setup.
The instinct might be to leave it exactly as found to photograph it, but the textbook says he must disconnect it immediately. Explain the mechanical threat here.
The threat is automated synchronization. Mobile devices are engineered to seamlessly sync data with desktop companion applications.
So it might be backing up right then.
If you leave the phone connected to the live PC, a preset scheduled backup could initiate. The laptop might automatically download new files to the phone, overwriting crucial deleted data in the unallocated space.
Or a trap could be waiting.
Or worse, the laptop could be running a script designed to wipe the phone the moment a specific file is accessed. You must instantly sever the physical connection to the PC and sever the wireless connection to the internet.
Which brings us to the actual methods of physical isolation. You cannot simply drop a live smartphone into a standard brown paper evidence bag.
Because the device will actively fight back. If it loses connection to its known Wi-Fi network, it aggressively scans for a cellular tower. It is hunting for incoming data, which could include the MDM Self-Destruct command.
So what are the options?
You have 4 procedural options to isolate the hardware. First, if the device is unlocked and the screen is accessible, immediately toggle on airplane mode. This uses the phone's own software to disable the radio transmitters.
That's second.
Second, you could power the device off, though as we just established, we vastly prefer to keep it on to capture the live RAM state.
What if the phone is locked, you don't have the passcode to access the control center for airplane mode, and you absolutely refuse to turn it off to save the RAM?
Then you must employ physical isolation. The third option, which sounds improvisational but is forensically sound, is placing the live device inside a clean metal paint can, ideally coated with radio wave blocking paint.
A paint can, really?
Yeah. The solid metal shell acts as an impermeable barrier. But the fourth, most professional and vastly preferred method is utilizing a Faraday bag.
I've heard the term Faraday cage in physics classes. Explain the actual science of how a Faraday bag isolates a phone.
It relies on principles discovered by Michael Faraday in the 19th century. A Faraday bag is constructed using layers of specialized fabric woven with a highly conductive metallic mesh, often copper, nickel, or silver.
Okay, so it's woven metal.
When external electromagnetic radio waves like a cellular signal hit the bag, the metallic mesh conducts that energy, distributing the electromagnetic field entirely around the exterior skin of the material. This creates a zero-field environment on the inside.
No radio waves in, no signals out. But dropping a live searching phone into a Faraday bag introduces a massive secondary hazard: extreme battery drain. Why does a blocked phone consume so much power?
It's a hardware response to signal degradation. When you seal the bag, the phone's cellular radio suddenly detects zero signal from the local tower. The internal logic assumes the user has driven into a tunnel or a rural area.
So it tries harder.
To reestablish the connection, the hardware massively boosts electrical power to the internal antenna, screaming into the void trying to reach a tower. It will sustain this maximum power output constantly, rapidly depleting the battery.
And if that battery dies inside the bag, you lose the RAM.
You lose the RAM.
So the absolute ultimate field protocol is the combo. Get the phone into airplane mode to tell the software to stop searching, and then place it into the Faraday bag as a physical failsafe against any localized signals overriding the software.
Correct. That preserves the volatile state while ensuring absolute isolation.
Let's address one more hardware hurdle before we reach the lab. What happens if an investigator decides to physically pull the SIM card out of the phone to analyze it separately, but the SIM card itself is locked with a pin?
Oh, this is a highly delicate situation because the telecom industry implemented a strict 3 strikes rule for SIM authentication. The microprocessor on the SIM card is programmed to accept exactly 3 PIN attempts.
3 strikes and you're out.
If you fail the 3rd attempt, the internal logic permanently locks the file structure.
You cannot brute force a SIM card.
Absolutely not. If it locks, it can only be overridden by acquiring the personal unlock key, or POK. The POK is an 8-digit code hard-coded onto the card by the carrier.
And where do you find that?
It's usually printed on the original credit card-sized plastic the SIM was punched out of. Since investigators rarely find the original packaging, they must issue a legal subpoena to the cellular service provider to obtain the PUK, which halts the investigation for days.
Given the severe penalty for guessing wrong, I found it fascinating and honestly a bit hilarious that the textbook notes seasoned forensic examiners will regularly use one of their 3 precious attempts to just input 1111 or 1234.
It is a testament to the weakest link in any security system: human psychology. Users are inherently lazy. They want convenience over security. It is astonishingly common for high-level corporate targets to secure their devices with 1234.
Amazing. Okay, the phone is now successfully secured. It is shielded in a Faraday bag, tethered to a high-capacity power bank, and transported to the sterile environment of the digital forensics lab.
Now the real work begins.
Right, Section 5, ripping the data. This is where the intense computer science and hardware engineering really come into play.
Before a single cable is connected, the examiner engages in rigorous preparation. They research the exact technical specifications, known vulnerabilities, and encryption standards of that specific make and model. They prepare the forensics workstation.
Why does the workstation matter so much?
Because mobile devices communicate over USB interfaces, which are drastically slower than direct internal computer buses, a full physical extraction of a 512 gigabyte smartphone can take anywhere from 6 to 24 hours.
About 4 hours.
Yeah. To prevent a catastrophic disruption during this massive data transfer, the examiner must absolutely verify that all sleep, hibernation, and power-saving modes on the forensic workstation are completely disabled.
And when they finally plug the phone into the computer,
Yeah.
they don't just use a standard cable, do they? They use a write blocker. Explain how a write blocker protects the integrity of the evidence.
An operating system like Windows is incredibly noisy. The second you plug a standard USB drive into a Windows machine, the OS automatically writes hidden volume information and timestamps to the drive.
Which ruins the evidence.
In forensics, altering the original evidence is a fatal error that will get the case thrown out of court. A hardware write blocker is a physical bridge device placed between the phone and the computer. It contains a specialized microprocessor that acts as a one-way valve.
So data only goes out.
It allows the forensic software to send read commands to the phone and pull the data out, but it physically drops and blocks any write command originating from the computer, mathematically guaranteeing the phone's storage remains pristine.
The sources mention that to facilitate this deep read, the examiner often has to manually manipulate the phone into debug mode.
Yes. Mobile extractions share similarities with live network acquisitions. The device must be powered on to interface with the operating system. For an Android device, the examiner will navigate deep into the system settings, tap the build number repeatedly to unlock the hidden developer options, and then enable USB debugging.
And what does that do?
This elevates the privileges of the USB port, allowing the forensic software to bypass the standard user interface and issue low-level command line instructions directly to the Android kernel.
When the data starts flowing out, it requires immense high-speed storage on the lab side. You can't capture a bit-for-bit image of a modern smartphone onto a cheap promotional thumb drive.
No, the integrity of the storage media is paramount. Examiners utilize heavy-duty magnetic arrays or specialized high-endurance flash media. The textbook explicitly mandates the use of multi-level cell, MLC, or triple-level cell, TLC, memory chips from highly reputable manufacturers.
And they avoid.
They specifically avoid quad-level cell, QLC, drives. While QLC drives are cheaper and hold more data, their memory cells degrade much faster and are prone to read-write errors during massive, sustained data dumps.
An error is bad news in court.
An error in the image file casts reasonable doubt on the entire extraction in a legal setting.
Let's map out the actual extraction levels. The textbook defines a hierarchy of techniques, ranging from simple software pulls to invasive hardware destruction. What constitutes a manual extraction?
Manual extraction is the least technical but often the most tedious method. If the device's data port is completely destroyed or highly aggressive software locks prevent a data connection, the examiner must literally use the device as a normal user would.
Like just taking pictures of the screen.
Exactly. They manually scroll through every text message, every photo, and every app using an external high-resolution camera mounted on a rig to photograph or record video of the screen. It captures the data, but it misses all the hidden metadata and deleted files.
Moving up the technical ladder, we have logical extraction.
A logical extraction utilizes the mobile device's own application programming interface, or API. The forensic software sends a polite request to the phone's operating system saying, please hand over all the contacts and SMS
And
databases.
the OS just hands it over.
The phone's OS gathers the files and sends them over. It is relatively fast and safe, but you only get the active files the OS allows you to see.
And selective logical?
A subset of this is selective logical extraction, where the examiner doesn't want the whole 500-gigabyte drive. They execute a targeted script to extract only one specific SQLite database, like the WhatsApp chat logs, to save time.
But the holy grail for an examiner is the physical extraction.
Physical extraction bypasses the operating system's API entirely. The forensic tool communicates directly with the flash memory controller to create a bit-for-bit raw binary image of the entire physical chip.
So it grabs the unallocated space, too.
Because it grabs everything, it captures the unallocated space the digital shredder been allowing the examiner to cover those deleted texts before the wear-leveling janitor destroys them.
But getting a physical extraction on a modern encrypted flagship phone is incredibly difficult. This is where the outline dives into advanced extreme extraction methods. What is hex dumping?
Hex dumping is highly invasive and carries significant risk. The examiner uses specialized software to force a custom modified bootloader program into the phone's RAM during the startup sequence.
They hijack the boot sequence.
This custom bootloader essentially hijacks the hardware before the main operating system can load its security protocols. This grants the examiner raw, unfiltered access to read the physical memory.
What's the risk?
If the custom bootloader is incompatible, or the injection fails, it can permanently brick the device, rendering the evidence permanently inaccessible.
If the software route fails, examiners attack the hardware directly. Explain JTAG extraction.
The Joint Test Action Group, or JTAG, established an industry standard for testing printed circuit boards during the manufacturing process. Manufacturers leave microscopic connection points, called test access ports, on the motherboard so factory robots can verify the chips are working.
Okay, so they use those testing ports.
In a JTAG extraction, a highly skilled examiner physically cracks open the phone, locates these microscopic T-tip nodes, and delicately solders copper wires directly to the motherboard.
Soldering directly to the board.
They then use specialized hardware to send low-level instructions through these wires, commanding the memory chip to dump its data directly, completely bypassing a broken screen or a locked USB port.
That is hardware hacking at its most visceral level. But it goes even further, the chip-off extraction.
When a device is severely physically damaged, say run over by a car or dropped in a lake, but the central memory chip survives, the JTAG ports might be severed.
But what then?
In a chip-off, the examiner utilizes thermal rework stations to apply precise, highly controlled heat to physically melt the solder and detach the flash memory chip directly from the motherboard.
They literally pull the chip off.
They then clean the microscopic pins and place the raw chip into a specialized forensic socket reader. It requires absolute thermal precision. If the heat gun is just a few degrees too hot, the silicon burns and the data is annihilated.
And the absolute final frontier, the most extreme method detailed in our sources, the micro-read extraction.
If the chip itself is cracked or damaged, examiners can utilize high-powered electron microscopes. They physically grind away the protective layers of the silicon wafer to expose the individual logic gates of the memory cells.
Wait, they look at the logic gates.
By visually observing the physical state of the microscopic transistors, they can manually determine whether a cell holds a 1 or a 0, reconstructing the binary data by hand.
I have to pause you here. Using an electron microscope to visually read ones and zeros physically baked into a silicon wafer sounds like the climax of a Hollywood spy thriller.
It sounds totally fictional.
From a practical, real-world perspective for a business student entering corporate IT, when is an investigation ever high stakes enough to justify that level of staggering cost and time?
It is an excellent reality check. In a standard corporate incident, say, an employee steals a client database or embezzles funds, you will never authorize a microread. The financial cost and the months of labor required are astronomical.
So who uses it?
Microreads are strictly reserved for top-tier national security incidents, massive-scale state-sponsored espionage involving billions of dollars of intellectual property, or catastrophic terrorism investigations where the device was physically obliterated by an explosion.
But it's good to know it exists.
However, while you may never commission a microread, understanding the underlying fragility and physical reality of data storage is a fundamental concept for anyone architecting a modern enterprise security operations center, or SOC.
Right, an SOC analyst won't use an electron microscope, but they will use a highly sophisticated software arsenal. The textbook emphasizes a critical operational rule. No single software tool can extract everything. Why must an examiner be proficient in multiple platforms?
The mobile landscape is brutally fragmented. Apple updates iOS constantly, patching vulnerabilities. There are thousands of different hardware configurations running customized versions of Android, not to mention iOS devices, smartwatches, and drones.
So one tool can't handle all that.
Every manufacturer uses different encryption implementations. A tool that easily cracks a Samsung might completely fail on a Motorola. An examiner must maintain proficiency with at least 2, preferably 3, distinct software suites, so that when they hit an inevitable roadblock, they can immediately pivot to a different methodology.
Let's break down the major players in the forensic toolkit. First on the list, Andriller CE.
Andriller CE is unique in the toolkit because it is a freeware Python script utility. It is purpose-built to execute logical acquisitions and data parsing specifically on Android smartphones.
And because it's Python.
Because it is built on Python, it is highly versatile and runs natively in both Windows and Linux command line environments. Its standout feature for analysts is that upon completion, it automatically parses the raw SQLite databases and generates a highly readable HTML extraction report that opens directly in a web browser, making the triage process incredibly efficient.
Next is a heavyweight, Belkasoft Evidence Center X.
Belkasoft is a comprehensive, commercially licensed digital forensic suite. It is not limited to mobile phones. It processes traditional PC hard drives, drone flight logs, and memory dumps.
What's its specialty?
In the mobile sphere, it is highly regarded for its deep analytical capabilities, particularly its effectiveness in authenticating and downloading complex Apple iCloud backups and decoding a vast array of third-party chat applications, browser histories, and geolocation artifacts.
If you've ever watched a true crime documentary, you have likely heard the name of our next tool, Celebrate.
Celebrate UFED Universal Forensic Extraction Device is arguably the global industry standard for law enforcement. It is a premium commercial product that provides both ruggedized field extraction tablets and deep lab analysis software.
It's the one with all the cables, right?
The physical kit includes a massive array of proprietary adapter cables designed to interface with virtually any mobile device manufactured in the last 20 years. Celebrate employs teams of vulnerability researchers to constantly develop proprietary bootloaders, allowing their software to bypass lock screens and execute deep physical extractions on a massive variety of handsets.
This next platform operates entirely differently. CellHawk from Hawk Analytics. It doesn't really extract data from the physical phone at all, does it?
No. CellHawk operates at the network level. It is a web-based, software-as-a-service, SaaS platform designed specifically to analyze the call-detailed records, CDR, and cell site location information, CSLI, provided by the cellular carriers.
Why do you need a SaaS platform to read a carrier report?
Because a tower dump can contain hundreds of thousands of individual ping records across multiple spreadsheets. Manually cross-referencing that data to map a suspect's movements could take a team of analysts weeks.
Ah, so it automates it.
With CellHawk, you upload the raw carrier logs into their cloud engine. Within minutes, the platform automates the analysis. It visually animates the mobile device's geographic movement across a map over time.
That's amazing.
It runs link analysis algorithms to instantly highlight which phone numbers the suspect communicates with most frequently, exposing hidden networks of co-conspirators. It transforms raw, overwhelming data into immediate, actionable intelligence.
That is an incredibly powerful capability for tracking corporate espionage or physical assets. What does DataPilot bring to the table?
DataPilot is another commercially sold extraction solution supporting Android, Apple, and iOS devices. Its architecture is heavily optimized for rapid triage and case management.
So it's about speed.
It excels at quickly acquiring contacts, messages, and media. And its reporting engine is designed to visually link multiple devices together, which is crucial when investigating organized intellectual property theft involving multiple employees.
The sources mention a very specific surgical tool called SQLite.
SQLite is a specialized freeware Java application. While suites like Celebrate grab the whole phone, SQLite is a scalpel.
A scalpel.
Its sole dedicated purpose is to dive into the raw hexadecimal code of individual SQLite databases to locate and reconstruct the deleted records hiding in the unallocated space before the SSD-ware leveling permanently destroys them.
Magnet Forensics is another massive name in the industry.
Magnet Forensics provides a robust commercial suite that structurally divides the forensic workflow into 3 distinct phases. First, Magnet acquires interfaces with the hardware to physically pull the raw data.
Then what?
Second, Magnet process takes that massive garbled binary dump, decodes the SQLite databases, decrypts the media, and builds a searchable index.
Right.
Finally, Magnet Examine provides the highly intuitive user interface where the actual investigator runs keyword searches, analyzes the parsed artifacts, and generates the final court-ready reports.
We also have the European powerhouse, Microsystemation AB, or MSAB.
MSAB is a major commercial vendor producing a highly integrated ecosystem of tools. Their core extraction engine is XRY, renowned for its physical and logical acquisition capabilities. They pair this with XCMN, their deep analytical software.
And for big companies.
Their defining enterprise feature is XEC, a centralized management platform that allows a massive corporate security department or a national police force to deploy, update, and monitor hundreds of extraction kiosks across multiple branch offices simultaneously.
Mobile Edit Forensic has a highly unique connection feature, right?
Yes. Mobile Edit is a dedicated mobile forensic suite that includes a built-in software write blocker. Its standout capability is its highly developed wireless extraction protocols.
So you don't even need a cable.
If a device's physical USB port is destroyed or intentionally glued shut by a suspect, Mobile Edit allows the investigator to initiate logical extractions over Bluetooth or legacy infrared connections, bypassing the damaged physical interface entirely.
Wrapping up the arsenal, we have Oxygen Forensics and Paraben.
Oxygen Forensics provides a commercially sold, ruggedized field acquisition kit built around their oxygen extractor software. It is particularly aggressive in its ability to parse cloud tokens from the mobile device to automatically download associated data from cloud storage providers, and it has deep support for decoding drone flight logs.
And Paraben.
Paraben software produces E3DS. Paraben is highly respected for its specialized bootloaders designed to bypass complex lock screens, its broad support for emerging Internet of Things devices, and its heavily automated data parsing engine.
The sheer scale and variety of this digital weaponry are astounding. It perfectly illustrates why a single tool is never enough. The combinations of hardware, encryption, and MDM policies are virtually infinite.
It is a relentless, perpetual cat-and-mouse game. Device manufacturers and corporate IT departments are constantly engineering stronger encryption and more aggressive MDM wipe protocols to protect data.
And the forensic tools try to catch up.
In response, the forensic community is constantly reverse engineering those defenses, developing new bootloaders and refining hardware extraction techniques. As we move closer to 6G infrastructure and seamlessly integrated edge computing wearables, the complexity of this battlefield will only compound.
We've covered an immense amount of technical terrain today. We started at the macro level, dissecting the physics of OFDM multi-lane highways and exposing how the invisible alpha, beta, and gamma antennas on cell towers constantly track our IMSI numbers to triangulate our location.
We examine the severe legal and operational implications of that architecture, detailing how active Stingray cell site simulators exploit battery-saving protocols to execute man-in-the-middle attacks, transforming location data into a Fourth Amendment battleground.
We cracked open the physical hardware, mapping out the hierarchical master, directory, and elementary files of a SIM card, and confronting the terrifying forensic ticking clock triggered by the SSD wear-leveling janitor incinerating deleted SQLite records.
We analyze the enterprise defenses, exploring how IT administrators weaponize mobile device management platforms like Intune to partition encrypted BYOD containers and initiate remote self-destruct wipes to secure trade secrets against physical extraction.
We established the rigid, unforgiving rules of securing a digital crime scene, isolating the active biohazard inside the metallic mesh of a Faraday bag, keeping the RAM alive with power banks, and preventing the fatal error of automated PC synchronization.
And we concluded inside the lab, navigating the escalating intensity of extraction techniques, from logical API queries to custom bootloader hex dumps, all the way to the extreme hardware hacking of JTAG soldering and thermal chip-offs, fueled by a multi-million-dollar arsenal of software suites like Celebrate, Belkasoft, and Cellhawk.
So the next time you sit in a boardroom or coffee shop and look at that 5-inch piece of glass and metal sitting on the table, recognize it for what it truly is. It is not just a phone. It is an active tracking beacon, a highly fortified corporate vault, and a relentlessly thorough digital witness, all operating simultaneously.
It permanently records the reality of your digital life, meticulously logging even the interactions you believe you have successfully erased.
To all the students and professionals listening, if you want to keep owning your career growth, mastering these complex systems, and embracing the kind of lifelong technical learning that defines industry leaders, please hit like, subscribe, and share. Do not forget to dive into the description below for access to additional resources that will give you a decisive edge in your classes and your professional trajectory.
The velocity of change in digital forensics is staggering. The foundational knowledge we discussed today is critical for anyone aiming for a leadership role in IT architecture, cybersecurity, or corporate risk management.
Join us next week as we push forward into Chapter 13, Email and Social Media Investigations. We will pull back the curtain to reveal the technical reality of what actually happens to those direct messages and corporate emails long after you empty your outbox.
The persistence of cloud data will radically change how you view your digital footprint.
I highly encourage all you students to aggressively explore the channel's other podcasts, playlists, videos, and classes. The landscape of technology never stops shifting, and your education shouldn't either. So as you head into your next business or IT class, ask yourself a hard question. If your organization's entire fleet of mobile devices were seized by a competitor or federal investigators tomorrow, is your mobile device management architecture mathematically robust enough to protect your trade secrets, or are you leaving a trail of unencrypted breadcrumbs for the electron microscopes to find?
It is the ultimate test of modern enterprise security, and a question every future IT leader must be prepared to answer.
That's a wrap on this episode of Digital Forensics. Until next time, analyze the copy, preserve the original.